Representative Landry.
Hey.
Hey, is that Representative Landry?
Hello?
Hello, is this
Yep, I just was listening to the end of you. How is it?
Oh, doing very well. I would ask you how you are doing tonight, but I saw what some of the things that happened in the legislature today, and it didn't look very good.
Every day, every day.
Every day.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, it is Louisiana after all. So, anyways, so everybody's listening, and everybody listening after the show,
Okay.
in the replay, as Representative Mandie Landry. Just tell everybody about yourself and what district you represent, where that is in Louisiana and the New Orleans area, and just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Quick question. Are you based in New Orleans or
Yeah,
elsewhere?
I live in Algiers. Yeah.
Okay, just making sure who I was talking to.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably a lot of people recognize my name. I'm Mandie Landry. I was elected in 2019 to the state legislature. My district is 91, and so I'm one of the sort of uptown districts. Not all the way. I have the Irish Channel, some of the Lower Garden, Milan, Broadmoor, and Hollygrove. So I have a very residential, extremely diverse district. And
Right.
I was a first-time candidate, never thought about running before, and I am not only the most progressive member of the legislature, but I definitely have probably the most progressive district in the state. So it's been a privilege.
Well, I mean, it's very good that you found yourself in a good
Yeah.
district to run in. Back in 2000,
Absolutely.
back in 2004, I'm my first time running for office. I decided to run for Congress, but I ran in the first congressional district, and that was just horrible.
Oh,
Yeah, so
yeah,
very
very tough.
gerrymandered and very terrible. So I didn't do very
Right,
well.
right.
But yeah, so
You tried though.
I did try and failed miserably, but I learned a lot. So there's that. So
There you go.
so I'm more focusing on this stuff now. So, but yeah, I mean, and am I right in remembering that for a while you unregistered as a Democrat, but you re-registered later?
I had a no, that's right. I had a very messy, ugly, aggressive, brutal Senate race last year in which a lot of my own people, being Democrats in New Orleans and the state party, were kind of part of it. And I'm a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, very far to the left, and our state party is just a complete disaster. And so I left and intended it to be indefinite to kind of point out, and it allowed me a lot of room to talk about the state party chair.
Mm-hmm.
And
Who's terrible?
I ended up going, I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Incompetent, unethical. And I ended up going back before session. I had a lot of, I don't want to call it pressure, encouragement from my caucus and friends. And everyone said, look, we want you there. It just makes everyone's life that much harder when you're not. And I can respect that, you know?
I mean, I had Devontae Lewis on the show before as well, and we talked about all of the shenanigans that took place. Yeah, we talked about all the shenanigans with the endorsement process and how the chair changed the rule. They changed the rules to try and screw them, and then they changed the rules again to try and screw them again. It's just terrible. I mean, she's Republican light. I mean, it's terrible. I
don't think she has principles even. I think it's just like a power, crown sort of thing. And she hasn't raised any money. She hasn't really recruited candidates. And those are the basic functions of the job kind of thing. So.
Right. I mean, I was in your boat as well. Way back when Edwin Edwards came back into the picture and decided to run for Congress again, I basically said, I was like, if the state party endorses Edwin Edwards for Congress, I'm leaving the party. And I thought it was the safest thing ever, because who would think that the party would endorse the convicted felon Edwin Edwards? And they did. And I was like, are you kidding me? So for and in Louisiana we have open primaries, so the only reason you need to be in the party is to vote in the presidential primary, and the presidential primaries are so late in the season it doesn't usually matter anyway. So I was like, meh. But then I went ahead and re-registered for 2020 so I could just vote in this primary just in case.
I think the country is going more the way of the independent. I mean, you saw the woman in Nebraska who's awesome. And I mean, I did it with no qualms. But when I've, had a lot of talking to, I have to rethink about it, just the practical matters. But people aren't really left or right, and younger generations, they hate it. They don't understand it. And I don't blame them.
Yeah. So one of the first reasons I had you on, wanted to get you on, was there's that bill that's being presented about they said it's if a police officer tells you that you can't approach your like if you approach a police officer within 25 feet and a police officer tells you to stop and you don't stop approaching, they can fine you up to $500 and lock you up for what, 6 months, is it, or 3 months or something like that?
I'm not sure. It's really bad. So for your listeners, I think we're debating it on the floor tomorrow.
All right.
It's scheduled for tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's actually going to happen, but you can watch the live stream of anything in the legislature, and we start at 1 tomorrow. So it is on the schedule, and we'll see if it happens. But it's when I saw it filed and I saw the author, who is a nice man, but very different. I said, this is something about this is off, but there was like 600 bills filed. So I sent it to, I think I sent it to my ACLU friend, and he's like, oh yeah, this is like a anti-filming bill. And I said, oh, of course it is.
Right.
And it's, you have to get 25 feet back, which is like basically all of the, George Floyd's and those situations would not have been, we wouldn't have really seen what they were doing. You would have only seen it from far away.
Right.
And you wouldn't have had the video evidence of what was happening if they had to be 25 feet away. And that's exactly what it is.
And like, how do you measure and how do you prove it? Like, it seems so subjective. Like, how does the officer say, like, this person's 25? I don't, how do I know? Like, it doesn't seem like you'd be able to prove that or not prove that. But yeah, it just seems to just, we need more transparency. We need more transparency with everybody in government, and police officers are part of the government. So we need more transparency, not less. So it's just one of the terrible things. But one of the other things, like
it's subjective and
terrible. It's a terrible rule. So last year, Louisiana passed a very draconian abortion restriction, and let me see if I get it right. It bans abortion at the point of implantation, and I think Edwards fought for that instead of conception to make sure that the morning after pill was legal. Supposedly, as supposedly something. He was trying to brag about that. Then the only exceptions in the law are if there is a threat of long-term permanent damage. So, like, if there's a threat of short-term permanent or short-term or long-term major damage or permanent major damage. So, if there's a threat of permanent minor damage or short-term major damage, that's not okay. But it has to be long-term major damage in order for there to be an exception. There's no exception for problems with the fetus. If the fetus is not viable, there's no exceptions for anything like that. If the fetus dies, you have to basically deliver it. And is that basically a correct interpretation of what the current law is?
So what it is now is there's no real abortion now unless you're like almost dying on the table, because they have in there a maternal health exception, which is when the life of the mother is in danger. And it's pretty narrow. It's narrow enough, or I should say also vague enough. That's what the litigation is addressing, that doctors and hospitals are like freaked out about what it means.
Right.
Because as I'm sure you and your listeners know, like so much stuff goes wrong in pregnancy. And it's way better to deal with it when you first see it going wrong than later when you're like on death's door. But they're freaked out about it. And the reason it's so vague is because the extremist anti-choice, right to life movement, they think women are lying and they think doctors are lying. And so they made it so that it's so draconian and weird and vague that everyone's afraid to use that exception. There's no rape and incest exception. They have something in there that you can have an abortion when the pregnancy is medically futile. So that's not a medical term. Doctors will tell you, they're like, there's nothing called medically futile.
Right.
But there's situations where, you saw the woman, Nancy Davis, she found out in Baton Rouge, her baby didn't have a skull. It just had like a brain stem, I think, or something like that. Arcania, I think it's all Arcania, something like that. And they still wouldn't. Baton Rouge Hospital still wouldn't do it, and she had to fly to New York, and clearly that baby wasn't going to live. So they left it vague enough and crazy enough and worrisome enough for the doctors who can face a long time in prison, so that everyone's afraid to do it, even if you're in a lot of trouble.
Right. And that's just, I mean, to me, I mean, I'm an abortion on demand person. You know, only 0.5% of abortions, you know, if I'm remembering correctly, take place after like the 21st week, and all of those abortions are ones that are taking place because of a health issue or a fetal abnormality that's either going to cause the fetus to die in utero or immediately after birth. Like, there's nobody who's waiting for 8 months and then it's like, you know, oops, I don't want to be a parent anymore, so I'm just going to eat the fetus out and not, you know, and, you know, nobody's making that decision, and everybody's, you know, trying to paint, you know, doctors and persons who can get pregnant as horrible, evil people who are just, you know, twisting their non-existent mustaches in most cases or whatever, and saying, I'm going to just, you know, kill all these babies because I'm a horrible person. Meanwhile, nobody wants to give them health care right after they're born. So,
yeah. So that's two big points you raised. So yeah, third trimester abortions are very rare. It's actually 2 or 3% the last trimester. And actually, Pete Buttigieg had a very good interview on it. And he's like, these are people who they have a crib, they have the baby's names picked out. Like, this is a very wanted, very planned pregnancy. Well, I wouldn't say planned, but like they knew it's happening, and then they find out something horrible, like really horrible. And you shouldn't force someone to continue to carry a baby they know is going to die. It's up to them if they want to do it. So they have to, I think only Colorado still does it, maybe one other state. It's hugely expensive, and it's horribly traumatic. But you have the propaganda of it is, you know, their whole partial birth abortion. In their mind, it's, you know, the baby's being born and at the last minute they change their mind. Like, that's insane. Like, if a woman walked into the doctor's office at 35 weeks and said, I want an abortion, they would immediately call like mental health professionals because something's wrong. Like, right. Something's very wrong about that. But you're right. They don't want to add to healthcare. They don't want to talk about infant mortality or, you know, lack of childcare or basically anything that would be helpful. Those are all disgustingly underfunded. And guess what? We're going to have way more babies in Louisiana, and they're going to be born to so many more women who are poor or on the precipice of poor.
Right. And ironically, they'll probably be born to people who are likely to be Democrats, and then the Democrats will retake the state. But that's not something they want to talk about.
Absolutely right. But they don't even have time to vote. They don't even have time to vote because they're working like 3 jobs.
But, you know, I mean, that's another. I mean, you know, it was an unrelated point, but you know, it might seem like an unrelated point, but in reality, it's not. Like, I saw a bunch of conservative people bemoaning women's suffrage. Like, they were like, what good has happened because of women's suffrage?
Oh my God.
And one of the first things that I found that happened almost immediately because of women's suffrage was infant mortality rates. You know, infant death rates dropped. Like, you know, more infants lived because now that women had the right to vote, they could petition their elected representatives to fund, like, you know, these programs that would go like door to door and like fund, you know, cleanliness and health drives or whatever, and basically fought all of these diseases and stopped all these diseases at the root. And so more babies were living longer and less babies were dying because of these illnesses. And so infant mortality dropped, all because women got the right to vote. So it's a good thing, you know. It was, so I said nobody had an answer for me on that one because they weren't expecting an answer. A, but B, right. You know, it just counters the fact that these, you know, women are not out to kill their baby. If a woman wants to have a kid, somebody is pregnant, they want to have a kid, they want to have their kid, they want to take care of their kid, and the only time they're going to have those rare exceptions are they have a crib picked out, they have you know. My family dealt, you know, me and my wife, we dealt with 2 miscarriages. It was earlier on, but it was sad, and, you know, we moved on. But, you know, and it happens. But
yeah.
And some of these ridiculous laws some of these ridiculous laws would prevent the procedure after a miscarriage to clean you out, like the DNC or whatever. So.
Yeah, I mean, you could bleed out. You could really bleed out. It's super dangerous to not get that taken care of. But I mean, a couple of points to that. You were talking about voting. So Louisiana, as an example, only about 20% of our legislature are women, and it shows.
Right.
It very much shows. You know, if we had more women, there would just be a lot more attention on healthcare and babies and education, and it really, really shows. But also in relation to abortion and unwanted pregnancies, about half of women who have an abortion already have a child. Maybe I think it's a little bit more. And that's because they know, you know, children are expensive, it's difficult, or they might have had a very difficult pregnancy and they are worried that they might leave the child orphan. But most of all, it's a lot of women who are very close to poverty or very, very close to being in a very bad situation, and children are extraordinarily expensive. And you know, if they're especially single mom, but if they're just close to poverty, they have to work. And so, you know, think about, you have the kid in school and you're doing okay, and then you're pregnant again. You're like, wait a minute, I'm working 2 jobs. Like, I can't have another baby. What am I going to do with it?
Right.
And that's why a lot of people do it, is financial reasons. But I mean, healthcare reasons. Like, you had a tough pregnancy and you don't want to go through that again, because what might happen to you? And it happens so much. Like, people don't realize it. Like your wife's miscarriages. I mean, if it had gone on longer towards the end, and she was on the end of something very, very traumatic for both of you, she might be too scared to do it again, and that's totally her choice.
And I think you said on
it
Twitter,
might be better for you and your kids.
Right. And I think you said on Twitter that there are no pro-choice women in the Louisiana Senate.
None. We have 5 women, 3 white Republicans, and 2 black Democrats, and they are all very, very anti-choice, and they're actually the ones who, for the most part, filed and passed like their worst laws in recent years. I mean, our first trigger ban for people listening is, we had in the law that if Roe was overturned, we'd immediately make abortion illegal in the state. So that was signed by our only female governor, Kathleen Blanco.
Right.
And so we have a weird state compared to other states, that it's not all white Republican men. It's just a lot of women from both sides of the aisle. And yeah, that's all we have in our Senate. And it became more, I shouldn't say more obvious, but more glaring, where I think it was South Carolina. Yeah, South Carolina, they had 5 women in their Senate, black, white, Democrat, Republican, and they sort of banded together to stop, I can't remember if it was a 6-week bill or something along those lines, to stop that from going into law. And they did it. And we don't have a single person who would do that. We have several black Democrats in the Senate, men who are pro-choice or who vote that way, but are not, as far as I've been able to tell, vocal about it. And it's very different. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's just how it is that women have a greater voice on this, which is one hand good because women can get pregnant, but on the other hand, we need more men like you and some of my colleagues to speak up about it, to recognize that it's not just affecting a woman's body, it is, but it's also affecting the families and the people involved. And she passes away in a difficult childbirth, you know, who's left raising the kids and dealing with the loss of a spouse?
Well, I'm a horrible fundraiser, but if you can help me with that, I'll be glad to join you in the legislature.
We need more people who are not retired, not wealthy, that who are really, you know, living life here, and they make it hard. It's really hard. Yeah,
I promised my wife that I wouldn't run for election, because I also ran like twice for like Kenner City Council, and that was terrible too. Like, I promised my wife I would not run for election again unless I could raise funds and not do it from my own pocket. So yeah,
it's hard. It's really hard.
Am I right though? Did I read this correctly, that one of the, I mean, all of the amendments to the horrible abortion law were like taken away today? But am I right that there was one Republican woman from St. Tammany that did propose one of those? Or am I wrong about that?
So I'll say they've all been passed over-ish. Like, there's still some. How should I say this? Nothing is really dead.
Okay.
Like, sometimes like a bill is dead in committee, but there's a lot of different maneuverings that sometimes there's a way to bring things back. So on one hand, nothing's dead, but Mary Dubison from Slidell area, I forget. She's a Republican. She is lovely. and she has her own conscience and does what she wants. And so she has a bill that is angles on the maternal health care, like what does it mean to be, in dire need or at risk. And she decided not to run it today when all the other ones got killed. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if that means she's going to try to run it again, or she just maybe read the tea leaves and said, let me try a week later. So it's still out there. And the ones that were killed today, it was like 2 rape and incest, and I don't know, something else. They're killed. They're killed. They're probably not coming back, but there's always a chance something can come back. But that committee apparently the Republicans on the committee just sat there and didn't ask a question and just voted no, as they were told to do or wanted to do, because it's an election year. And
of course,
it's an election year. And another thing, there's so much I've learned in this job, but it's not really their voters. So Lift Louisiana, for anyone listening, you should give them your money. They're a Louisiana-based reproductive organization. They're wonderful. I've done legal work with them for years, and they do policy work. And they've been working in this sphere for a long time, and they did a big statewide poll early in the year to just kind of gauge what people's views on abortion were since Roe was overturned, but also in specific areas of the state. Mm-hmm. And the poll is great. You can find it online, and people are way more pro-choice than they were before Roe was overturned. But they discovered in many areas of the state, not just sort of near blue cities like Slidell, but even some red areas, people are much more open to exceptions and abortion in general. And it gives, on one hand, it gives these elected officials sort of cover, knowing that their voters are with them. The problem is Louisiana Right to Life and Family Forum and these groups have so much money and political power that what they do is just attack these people who they consider to be moderate when they run for re-election.
Right.
So it's not even really the voters, it's the money. It's the money going against them. And so they're like, well, I can stand on principle and never be back, and you'll have someone crazy in my spot or try to, thread the needle, and maybe I'll be back. And I'm glad I'm not in that position, because I don't know what I would do.
Right.
I think they look at it like, do I come back and be a somewhat voice of reason, but let people down? Or do I go full force what I believe in, and then I'm not coming back, and it's going to be some Trump person? Oh, yeah. And it's a hard space to be in, and I don't know what that's like.
One of the problems I find, though, with a lot of polling, and I'm not saying that their poll is inaccurate. It's probably very accurate, but a lot of polling is incomplete, because you'll see like national polling that says 60 to 65% of people want abortion in most, if not all, cases. On gun control, you see like 80 to 90% of people want universal background checks, but you don't necessarily see how many of those people want that and would tell the representatives, if you don't vote for it, I'm not voting for you. Like maybe somebody wants it, but they don't want it badly enough that they would reject their current representative if they don't support it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I don't want it, but it's not a priority for me, or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess
some of it.
Maybe suburban, some suburban Republican woman or whatever, who might feel like she's, she personally might be pro-choice or whatever, or personally thinks that there should be some exceptions, but is doesn't necessarily care because she doesn't want to have other, she cares more about other policies because she could always fly to New York and have it taken care of, but doesn't care if, somebody in some other part of the state can't access it for whatever reasons,
Yeah, and that involves the one issue voter thing.
Right.
And I feel like people who trend towards pro-choice are not really one issue voters.
Right.
They're they're gonna look more at the whole candidate, whereas the Right to Life movement, the anti-choice movement, has so much power that so many voters around the country are a one-issue voter in that, or they use that, which I've seen in Louisiana, they use that as a reason to feel better about voting Republican. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, well, I'm so pro-life, I could never vote for that person, when really they just want to vote Republican. Mm-hmm. And you'll find a lot more on the right, more single-issue voters, or voters who can get wrapped up in that. Maybe before campaign season starts, they have a lot of varied views, or they say, I'd vote for this one for that reason, or multiple reasons. And then campaign time comes and they just like, the outside money or whatever just like hammers the other person, like, you want to kill babies, or like you want to take my guns, you want to take my guns, you want to take my guns. And then suddenly the entire election is about one thing.
Right.
When really it's not. But that's what it becomes, because money in politics is gross.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have any other like legislative priorities that are going on that you want to try and get passed in the current session, or that you're trying to push through, or?
Yeah, it's what has been interesting in my time here is that, because I've evolved, I definitely had a lot of disappointments the first year or two, not realizing what I was dealing with and not realizing the power of outside groups. And so stuff that I thought was very straightforward and simple just crashed and burned, and I just didn't even know. So I've gotten a little more practical about it, but I guess as a larger point, my point is that you never really know how an issue or a bill is going to go, because the ones you think are easy die, and then the ones you think are like, I hate to call them a throwaway, but like my wish bills, every now and then one gets through. But this year, I have one and a half, I guess I should say, that has been blowing through and getting stronger, and it's about criminal blight in New Orleans. And that sounds like a very like weird, nerdy policy thing. But throughout the state, especially in New Orleans, we have these slumlords that own these like massive properties or multiple properties and huge apartment complexes. And the people are living in squalor because they can't go anywhere else. And it's almost impossible under state law to do much about it. Like, it's really, really hard. And so we're strengthening it to put more criminal penalties, a threat of jail time. I can't believe I'm doing that, but it's worth it. Putting it in RICO. And it's been something that's been growing and gaining strength. And it's really a tenant's rights issue, that you have the right not to live in squalor. You have the right not to live next to crime and an infested apartment complex. And it's become like something that I just filed kind of at the last minute, like, yeah, we should do something about criminal blight. And it's actually become something that's now like really important to the major cities in the state, as housing becomes so expensive, because you have people who are a step above being homeless, living in horrific conditions, and they can't do anything about it. And we want these slumlords to fix it up. So just as an example, I just thought that was like, I was changing a statute, and now I'm like, wait a minute, we might actually be improving a lot of people's lives and holding bad people accountable. So that something that I didn't think was, I guess the point is, something so major has become something so much bigger. I also have some aspirational bills. I still have one we're going to hear next week. I have no idea what's going to happen in this, but aside from weed,
right,
which I get questions on all the time, the second most popular question I get is, why don't we have a ballot initiative process in Louisiana? So I assume you know what that is.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, like a citizen's trying to get something on the ballot.
Yeah, so it happens in a lot of states, and it's been happening more in recent years. And I get that question all the time, like, can't we do this? Can't we put it on the ballot? Can't we do this? And we just don't have it in Louisiana. And I'm trying to quietly put it on the ballot so that people in Louisiana can decide, do we want to have this process? And it's been very interesting, because it's very much a pro-democracy, pro people's rights sort of thing. And I think a lot of people are afraid of it because, I could put weed on the ballot. We could get minimum wage on the ballot. But on the other hand, we might have some weird, prayer in school or more abortion restrictions or something crazy. And
right.
It's like I'm just throwing it out there to see what happens. But people want it, and I think it could be used into a force for good. So, you're filing bills, and something that seems small and practical becomes this big improvement, and then something that seems straightforward, I might have a 30-minute committee hearing, and then it just dies. Right. I don't really know, Well,
I mean, it's possible. I mean, and that sometimes you can get around hopefully it'll be a way for popular things, you can get around the gridlock of the legislature. I guess two bills that I've heard of, that one of them that keeps coming up every year. The driving with cell phones bill, is that passing this year or no? Do you think that'll pass?
You're asking me right now, and I don't remember what happened to it last year. I know I voted for it. I think it must have died in the Senate.
It always dies.
Do you mean the hands-free bill, that you have to use a hands-free device? Is that what you mean?
I mean, is that because I thought it was just not using a cell phone altogether, but I mean, I always use hands-free. But one of the funniest things was, I remember once I had a different radio show, like on AM radio a while back, and I think it was Austin Badon way back when, who was proposing the bill that would ban you from using a cell phone in the car, and they had to table it because he was stuck in traffic and had to call in to tell him that he was not going to be able to make the meeting. So,
hilarious.
He had to call into this car. I'm like, how ironic is that? And there's the other one though. Typical. What about there's the one about that's getting a lot of play, I think, in some conservative areas down here, especially because of the whole silly recall Latoya thing about, trying to change the recall laws to be a percentage of who showed up instead of a percentage of the electorate, like as a whole. Yeah. What do you think about that one?
So we debated it for a while on the floor yesterday. So that was filed by Paul Hollis in St. Tammany. Can't remember exactly where he is in St. Tammany, but he filed that, and it was in response to the recall in New Orleans, right. Which, as I agree with, and most people agree with, the number of signatures is really high.
Right.
Like it's almost impossible to get to.
Right.
So he filed one that would make it the percentage of the people who voted in that election. And so before we had the debate, I was kind of in the middle. I was like, I think the number's too high, but I don't know how this is going to work. And we started debating it, and I did a calculation, which I think might have killed the bill for him, unfortunately. I did a calculation and asked him about it on my race in 2019. So I'm using round numbers, about 15,000 people voted in my race in 2019.
Right.
And I think I had like 7,800 votes, and then the other opponent had like 7,100 or something like that. It was like 52-48%, something like that. And so under his new proposal, it would have been 30% of the people who voted in that race.
Right.
So that would have been, and we did all this on the floor, and everyone like perked up. So it would have been, in that election of 15,000 people, my opponent would have needed 4,400 people to sign the petition to do a recall election. Well, shit. I mean, I just beat him by like 800 votes. Easy to get 4,400 if you had 7,000. I mean, 4,400 right. is probably his base. So if he had enough money behind him or anger or whatever, that would have been relatively easy to get those signatures and then force me into doing another election. So right. I would have had to do the whole thing all over again. And so people started perking their ears up, and they're like, wait a minute, like you're saying it's going to be easier to recall us than it was for us to get elected.
Right.
And so that's kind of the problem with doing it that way, is maybe if it was 50%, that would make more sense.
That's where I'm at.
But
that's exactly where I'm at on it. I was always been at. I always thought that the amounts of recall was too high, based off. I don't buy the conspiracy theories of we don't know how many. I always thought it was too high based on the total bit. But yeah, I always said it should be based on the amount of people that voted, but it should be 50% plus one, and that's where
50
I'm at.
or even 50 or even 60, because we have a lot of legislative races, especially in your big cities like New Orleans, that are very close.
Right.
So I almost feel like 60%, be like, all right, you got to get all your voters to sign it, and you got to get some of mine who are dissatisfied with me, because that's what it is. You have to get enough people to say, I don't like the job she's doing. And I kind of feel like that's what it should be, that you need a majority of people. Maybe it's only 51% to say, no, we don't like it. Because 30% is, I mean, that could be just like your friends. I mean, a lot of these places around the state have far fewer people who vote in elections compared to Orleans. And so you might only have 5,000 people vote in that race, and you only need like 1,500. I mean, that's like nothing.
I agree with you totally. I agree with you 100% on that one. Yeah, that's the 30%. When I heard 20 or 30%, I was like, that's way too low. And you make a very good argument as to why it's I wasn't able to articulate at the time when I heard as to why it was way too low. It just in my gut, it felt way too low. You articulated perfectly as to why it's way too low. So
when you do the numbers, and multiple people came up to me after, they're like, "Oh my God, I never thought about the numbers." You're exactly right, because we talk in like theory and, oh, we should do this or that, and I just did the calculations, and poor Paul was doing the calculations on his phone, and he's like, yeah, that would be the amount. I could see his face kind of like, oh shit, she kind of got me. He's a great guy, by the way. He's really smart and wants to improve this, and I think this just might have gone a little too far in the other direction, and there's a middle ground. I don't know if he's going to propose to amend it.
Sure.
He might, and then we'll be having a different discussion, but we haven't voted on it yet, is the period on that.
All right, cool. Well, anything else you want to say? How can people find out more about you and support you in your next election or whatever?
Yeah, so it's this year. So for people who are listening, all of your state offices are up for re-election. So the entire legislature, all your 105 reps and 39 senators, even if they were, I mean, we had a special election in Orleans. He's been here 2 months, and he has to go run again. Governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer, everyone's up. So look for us. I'm at Vote Landry on all social media. I am not related to Jeff Landry. I have to say that all the time.
Thank goodness.
No relation, common last name. We're diametrically opposed on basically everything. But find me there if you're looking for someone progressive. You found a home in me. I haven't met an underdog issue that I didn't like, and it's just, I think people need to realize how important it is to have people pushing back. I mean, we only have 33 Democrats. New Orleans is always in the doghouse here. We'll get some stuff through. Like my blight bill is important to everyone in the state, so that'll get through. But it's also important for people in the minority to keep pushing abortion and gun safety. I do it every year. It's a losing battle, but I feel like my colleagues need to know that there's alternative viewpoints. And so you need to do those things. I had a conversion therapy bill, almost got out of the committee shockingly. And y'all have all seen this year, we have so many anti-LGBT bills, and they're horrible. But it's important for all of you to write in and come testify so that my colleagues can learn and also see that not everyone in the state agrees with them. So look me up, and I'm very responsive to social media messages, and I talk a lot on media, and I try to just be informative when I can.
All right. Well, thank you very much for calling in. I appreciate it. You have an open invitation to come back whenever you want, and hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Wonderful. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, you're very welcome. You have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.